By the end of this episode, you're going to know exactly how to build friendships you can rely on so you never waste another second on someone who doesn't deserve your trust. My name's Teshan Fernando, and I've spent the last 13 years studying how to live a better life. And now, as a high school teacher and teenage life coach, I'm on a mission to help you, the next generation, live happier, healthier, and more successful lives. Most of these lessons I've had to learn the hard way, and I share them here with you now in the hopes that you can avoid the pains that I've been through. So, over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the 3 foundational pillars to building trust in a friendship, and I'm going to walk you through the 3 major pitfalls I see many of my students and myself falling victim to when trying to connect. So let's jump right in. Okay, so first pillar is probably not something you would expect. I think it's generally associated with antisocial behavior, but as you'll see here, it's very, very important in any relationship, platonic or otherwise. First pillar is conflict. Now, if you had told me 10 years ago, Teshan, if you want to have good friendships 10 years from now, you need to master the skill of conflict, I would have thought you were crazy, right? Because 10 years ago, in my mind, conflict is what ended friendships, not what built them. But now, having lived much more life, I've learned that the best relationships aren't actually free of conflict, because if there isn't much conflict, then there probably isn't much honesty either. And it's important that we define conflict properly so that it makes sense in this context and so that it's useful for us. The way that I define conflict is any action that you take to relieve a real or perceived tension between you and somebody else. So let me tell you a story to kind of explain what I'm talking about there. So I love to travel, and I tend to find friends who like to travel too. And one of my favorite things about traveling is you often make more friends while you're traveling, just from the people that you meet. But a couple of months ago was the first time I went on a trip. I went to Mexico, and I actually came back from that trip with less friends than I started out with. And it was a bigger group of people, and I never traveled in a big group before. And it was also a really good, really old group of friends. Old as in I had known them, most of them, for many, many years. Some of them even decades. And if you've never traveled before, whether it's by yourself or with a small group or a big group, you're basically taking a bunch of people with different preferences, different needs, and different wants, and you're putting them in this new environment with new stimuli that they've never experienced before, and you never know how people are going to react or what they want or what they're going to do or what they're going to say. And it's essentially like the worst breeding ground ever for conflict. It's inevitable when you're traveling. You're going to butt heads. You're going to come into conflict. And that is unfortunately what happened. And there were some things that were said and some things that were done that couldn't be taken back. And we all came back from that trip really angry at each other. But it wasn't actually those events that ended our friendships. It was the way the conflict was handled after the fact that really put the nail in the coffin. And what I mean by that is, even though we were really old friends, for the majority of our time together, we had been able to avoid any major conflict. You know, we could have a small tiff here or there or a small disagreement, and we'd handle it as friends do. But we never had a big, major conflict like this. And I don't really think we knew how to handle it. And so while there were some good, honest, open conversations at the start of the conflict, closer to the end, and especially in the middle where most of the conversation needed to be happening, there was more space being taken than actual conversations being had. And I remember telling my brother about this. I was kind of catching him up on the events of what had been happening, and I was telling him, I can't believe that these friendships have just like fallen apart. I've known these people for forever, and I never saw this coming. And I was telling him how, we were just taking some space, giving each other time to process our feelings. And my brother stopped me in the middle of my sentence, and he looked me dead in the eye, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Brother, I think it might be the lack of conflict that's killing your friendships right now." And I really had to pause after he said that, because it was a total reframe of how I had viewed conflict in the past, right? For me, conflict in the past, like I shared earlier, is something that you try to avoid. It's something that ends friendships, not something that builds them. But as I reflected on his statement more, and especially in the context of this real life conflict that was happening in my life, I realized that most major issues in relationships don't stem from the issues themselves, but from the conflict that needs to happen that's avoided after the fact. Which brings us to pitfall number 1, avoidance. Avoiding conflict is what kills friendships. And I would actually go so far as to say, if I can just kind of tweak your perspective here a little bit, you can't actually avoid conflict. Conflict is not something you can avoid. That's not something that you can actually do. Conflict is inevitable. When you take different people with different perspectives, and different wants and different needs, and you bring them together, there's going to be differences. This is just a natural part of interacting with people. And I think it's something that we look for in people. We like the difference, right? It spices things up. It makes our friendships fun. But it also necessarily creates conflict. And so conflict existing or not is not really the question. Conflict existing is not what breaks or makes friendships. It's how you handle that conflict that will break or make your friendship. So you have two options when a conflict comes up, when a difference comes up, right? You can either face it or you can let it fester. And I kind of liken this to a bacterial infection, which I know is kind of gross, but I think it kind of gets the point across. If you have a serious infection, you have one of two choices, right? You can either go to the doctor, get some antibiotics, and you can treat it, or you can let it get worse. And there's no third option where it just magically goes away. Not if it's a serious infection, right? It will eventually get so bad that you die, or you go to the doctor and you get it treated. That's it. Those are your only options. And I think that people, they don't really think the whole avoiding conflict thing through. And I don't want to cast any shade on anyone who avoids conflict, because for one, I was, and in some cases still am, that person, right? I would say a lot of my friendships have come to a close because I wasn't able to properly face the conflict. And I would say that in general, sometimes it is cowardice, sometimes it is irresponsibility. But I think in general, when people avoid conflicts, they're doing it for a good reason. They're trying to save the relationship. The problem is when you play the tape through and you think about it just a little bit longer, you just play it 2 or 3 plays down the future. What happens when you avoid conflict? We all know what happens because we've all done it before. I know you have. When you avoid a major issue in a friendship or in a relationship, you just end up creating a million other problems that are indirectly related to that major issue, right? We've all seen this, or we've all been a part of this, right? It's that couple that it's constantly bickering and constantly having these tiny little fights because no one is willing to bring up the big problem that they actually need to face. Or the 2 friends who used to be really close, or even roommates who used to be really close, but somewhere down the line, something happened that pissed somebody off. And instead of talking about it, now there's this space. And slowly over time, the friendship fades away. The friendship kind of just falls apart because people aren't facing the music. They're not facing the issues. And I just want to be clear. Remember, our definition of conflict is any action that you take to relieve the real or perceived tension between you and somebody else, which actually gives us a lot of flexibility, right? That means that conflict can look different in different situations. I think generally when we think of conflict, we think of a confrontation. And I've been very careful not to use the word confrontation because that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about conflict. And sometimes to solve conflict, you need a confrontation. Right? I think a lot of the times that is what's required. You need to sit down, you need to look the person in the eye, and you need to tell them what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and they need to tell you what they're thinking and what they're feeling. But sometimes the time for conversation is over. Sometimes it's not what's needed anymore. Sometimes conversation isn't going to help, and you need action. Right? Sometimes you just need to end your relationship with that person. Sometimes you just need to cut them off. Sometimes you just need to take a step back, just create a little boundary. Sometimes you just need to create some space. Many a conflict has been solved by simply decreasing the frequency of interaction between the 2 people, right? A lot of us have those friends where we can't hang out with them every day, but if we just see them once a week, we're fine. A lot of us have those friends where we can't see them once a week, but if we see them once a month, things are golden, right? So on and so forth. You get the point. But regardless of conflict looking different in different situations, what they do all have in common is that they all require some kind of action. Or in other words, they all require some kind of change. Something has to change. You have to do something in order for the conflict to be resolved. If you just do nothing, then nothing is going to change. If you do nothing and you expect something to change, that is the definition of insanity. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I just mean that nothing is going to happen for you if you don't make it happen. Okay? By the way, if you're really enjoying content like this and you want to see more of it, please subscribe so that I can give you more of this content, and drop a like too so that I can see that this is the kind of stuff that you're into. Okay, back into it. Pillar number 2. You're going to love me when I say this. Pillar number 2 is vulnerability. And again, going back to me 10 years ago, that word, vulnerability, would have scared me so much. I was so afraid to be real with people, so afraid to show the inner workings of my mind and of my heart to anybody. And again, I think it's important that we define it. And actually this time I've got 2 definitions for you. I've got a normal definition and I've got an anti-definition. So, normal definition of vulnerability, letting people see the real you. In other words, just being real with people, right? I think we all are familiar with that definition of vulnerability. The anti-definition, which is the word that I use to when we define something by what it's not, which in this case I think is actually really helpful. I would define vulnerability as not trying to control other people's perception of you. And I think when we define it like that, it becomes really clear what we're not trying to do. And it becomes really clear what's not vulnerability, right? Anytime we say something or do something or try to look a certain way to get a specific reaction from somebody, we are not being vulnerable. We are, in some small way, being manipulative, right? We're trying to get them to see us a certain way. They're trying to have a certain perspective or perception of us. And that's not vulnerability. And I'm not necessarily saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that in the context of building friendships, it's not that productive, which I'll get into why. One of my greatest joys as a teacher is developing relationships with my students. It is by far my favorite part of any period and of any day. And without exception, every great relationship that I have with a kid is because we've had some moment of mutual vulnerability where I have shown them the real me and they have shown them the real me. Sometimes that looks like an actual genuine conversation where I'm telling them something personal that I wouldn't just say to anybody, and they're telling me something personal that they wouldn't just say to anybody. Sometimes it's someone just genuinely being you, and I catch them being themselves, right? And that happens, right? You know when that moment happens, when someone sees you just being you, and they don't judge you for it. They just let you be you, and they just appreciate you for being you, right? My students catch me doing that all the time because I'm always in my own world. And I catch my students doing that all the time too because they're always in their own world. That's what teenagers do, man. And those moments have always brought us closer. And it's really helped me understand that as human beings, we just love each other's rough edges. We love learning about people because when we first meet someone, I kind of liken it to like they're just this shadowy outline of a person and we don't really know anything about them. And so that's all they are. And as we learn more about them, we kind of start to fill in the sketch. And anytime we learn something genuine, something real about somebody, it's this splash of color that just really brings the humanness of somebody to the forefront. It helps us relate to them, right? Because we're human and we know we're human because we tend to know ourselves. But until someone else shows us their humanness, it's really hard to connect with them. Which brings us to a question, right? If we all know that we're human, and we all know that we have these rough edges, we all know that we have these things that are wrong with us, why is it so hard to be vulnerable with people? Why does it feel so scary? And this is another thing that being a teacher has kind of helped me understand. It's as if we've all agreed at some point to take part in this global play where everyone has been given a part that they have to play. and they damn well better not deviate from it. And being a teacher has given me a backstage pass to this play. And what I mean by that is I could take part in the play, but I can also see the inner workings. I can take part in the social game that every teenager has to play in high school without actually playing the game. I can see how it works. I can interact with it without getting burned because I'm not really subject to the game of teenage social dynamics anymore, right? As a teacher, I don't have to worry about that. And it's taught me a lot about people, which is what I'm going to share with you, right? I think the main thing it's taught me is that everybody, and I mean everyone, secretly wants to be loved. And I think we know that, right? And we know that about ourselves, and we know that about people, but for whatever reason, we forget. We forget it about ourselves, and we forget it about other people. Everybody wants to be loved. And with that desire to be loved and to be accepted comes fear. And fear is our second pitfall. Fear of social rejection, fear of shame, fear of whatever it is that you're afraid of fear itself, right? It's like we've all decided to put on these masks, and that mask symbolizes what we think other people want to see. And that's all we show. We don't show any more or any less. We go into a situation, we determine what it is that we think is socially acceptable, and then we do our best to morph to that. And something I've been doing as a teacher is I've been experimenting with taking the mask off. And it's been really, really fun. I've come to realize that when you take your mask off, when you be vulnerable with people, you get one of two reactions, right? The first reaction is they freak out, right? They're like, like, what are you doing? Put your mask back on. Like, that is not socially acceptable. And, I don't think this actually happens that much. I think where I see it the most is actually, when you're a teenager, where I see it the most is actually with adults. I think this is something that adults do a lot of the time without realizing how damaging it is. We see someone being socially unacceptable. And we as adults have already experienced what it's like to do something socially unacceptable, to be vulnerable and to be rejected for that vulnerability. And we know how painful it is. And we don't want anyone else to go through that. And so in an attempt to try to protect the people that we love, we try to push them towards social norms without realizing that it stifles their uniqueness and it stifles their ability to be themselves. The second reaction and this is the one that I get most often when I take my mask off, is the other person. They're like, oh, I don't know we were doing this, but cool. Like, I can finally take this stinking mask off too. I didn't want to wear it in the first place. And now you're just both there and you're just being real with each other. And those are the best moments. I live for those moments. I had one the other day and I'll never forget this because it was so vivid. We have something called advisory in my school, which is like kind of like a homeroom. And so students just go to other classes or they do missing work or whatever. And in reality, like for the most part, we just kind of sit around. And sometimes I go and I talk to my students. And the other day I was talking to one of my students and I can't remember why, but my life as a middle schooler and as a high schooler came up. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to take my mask off and just see what happens. And, she was asking me, what was my life like as a middle schooler and as a high schooler? And I was very real with her and I was very direct with her. And I told her that it was hard, that those were some of the hardest years of my life. And I shared with her how I almost committed suicide when I was in middle school because I was in so much pain and I just felt so misunderstood. And I wasn't trying to bring the vibe down. I didn't say it in a sad way. I wasn't looking for pity. I was just sharing and I was being real. And I'll never forget the way that she reacted because it was like we were in a movie. She looked at me. She looked around. She looked to her left and to her right. She looked behind her to see if anyone was listening. And then she leaned in. And I was like, oh shit. And I leaned in too. And she was like, I was like that when I was in middle school too. And just like that, the masks had been taken off. And we had reached this new depth of connection, right? That I don't often reach with my students. I reach it, but I don't reach it often, right? It's hard to make those moments. It's hard to come across those moments. And I think what that moment taught me, especially after I reflected on it for a little bit, is that the average person waits to feel comfortable before they're vulnerable with somebody. But the extraordinary person, the person who takes charge of their relationships and their friendships, they create comfort by being vulnerable. We have all sunk into this sort of like, who's going to do it first? Who's going to be real first? Who's going to be vulnerable first? Who's going to take their mask off first? Because it's not going to be me. I'm not going to be the one to put myself on the chopping block. And while there's nothing really wrong with that, it's just kind of an unreliable strategy. When it comes to making friends, when it comes to building trust, it doesn't work very well. It's very hit or miss. You never know when someone is going to open up to you, right? I feel like the reason we have so few close friends is because there's so few people who are willing to open up first. And if we take it upon ourselves to open up first, to be brave, and to show our real face to people, we'd have a lot more good friends. I think that the other thing I've learned, and I kind of learned this before my time as a teacher, I learned this at my previous job. I was at a place where I was really well liked, but I felt really lonely and I didn't really feel well loved or understood. And I came to realize through some reflection that in order to be loved, you have to be yourself. Because you might be around people who are willing to love you for who you are. But if they don't see who you are, if you don't give them that opportunity, they're never going to be able to love you because they don't know what the real you is like, right? You might, if you walk around with your mask all day, and that's what people think you really are, they'll come to love the masked version of you. And that'll feel good. You'll feel accepted. But you're never going to feel loved and you're never going to feel understood because you haven't given people the chance. And I get it, right? I know why we all do this. It's because of a fear of rejection, and I feel that fear too. But if I can just reframe rejection for a second for you, I think this is really, really, really powerful. Rejection is inevitable. Instead of trying to avoid it, optimize for it. And what I mean by this is, no matter who you try to be, no matter who you pretend to be, or how real you are, there will always be people who don't like you. There will always be people who don't vibe with your vibe. So you might as well just be yourself. That way, when people are rejecting you, you know that they weren't a good fit. And when people accept you, you know they're accepting you for who you really are. It opens yourself up to be loved. Truly, fully, for who you actually are. And it helps you get rid of the people that you wouldn't enjoy being friends with in the first place. Third pillar, number 3. And I think this is actually most important. Open and honest communication. And the reason I say this is the most important is because it drives the other two. If you master and you practice the skill of open and honest communication, the conflict piece and the vulnerability piece will kind of take care of themselves. And I kind of learned this actually also at my previous job. I had an incredible friend at my previous job. And I met her kind of randomly. We were just on shift together and we just got to talking. And I was like, hey, I know this is kind of random, but we're really vibing right now. Do you want to get some coffee after work and keep talking? And she was down. And, we were just friends. And we were very clear about that from the beginning. But when we were hanging out for the first time, maybe like 30 minutes in, right? We were really vibing. We were like having this great conversation. I can't remember what we were talking about, but I can remember feeling so good talking to her. She just, out of the blue, just looked me dead in the eyes and was like, I'm really enjoying this conversation right now. And that's it. She said that and she just let it sit. And my mind went blank. I didn't know what to say. In the back of my head, I was like, what is going on right now? Like, are you hitting on me, or are you just being so real right now? Is this just who you are? Because remember that I just met this person like an hour ago. And it became clear as we spoke more and more that was just who she was. That was just how she communicated. She was just open and honest and direct from the get-go. And honestly, it was really off-putting at first because I wasn't used to it. That's not really how we communicate on a day-to-day basis, right? When you really think about it, our general communication with people is fraught with dishonesty. And that brings us to pitfall number 3, which is dishonesty, right? And I'm talking about the big pieces of dishonesty and the little pieces of dishonesty, right? We, for whatever reason, have, I don't know if that's just kind of how our society is, but we tell white lies all the time to avoid conflict, to avoid hurting feelings. We tell lies all the time to avoid issues. Sometimes we just tell lies because we feel like it. I feel like this is very normal, especially when you're younger. I feel like the importance of honesty hasn't really sunk in. It just feels like something that adults tell kids to like get them in trouble. And it's not like something that's important for life, which couldn't be further from the truth. Like, being honest and being open with people is one of the biggest hacks in building friendships. And being in that friendship with her gave me permission to practice being open and honest with her too, which is exactly what happens when you're open and honest and direct with someone. They tend to be that way back because they realize it's okay. It's kind of like when you take your mask off and they realize, oh, I can take my mask off. When you start to speak openly and honestly and directly, people usually hit you back at that level. And I just, I'll never forget all the moments with her where she texted me to hang out or called me to hang out, and I texted her or called her to hang out, and she would just be like, nah, I don't want to. I'm not really feeling it today. And in turn, sometimes I would be like, no, I'm kind of just in the mood to play video games. I don't really want to hang out. And there was no harshness to it. There was no harm. We were just being real with each other. That was just how we were feeling in the moment, right? And that may sound horrible, but it made the moments where we did want to hang out so much more meaningful because we knew we were 100% in it, right? If I asked her to hang out to get some coffee after work and she said she was down, I knew she was down. Like, she was down, like she wanted to, right? She wasn't just saying it to be nice. She wasn't just saying it to placate our friendship. She was saying it because she really wanted to hang out. Because I knew if she didn't want to hang out, she would just say no. And she would tell me why, and she wouldn't hold back. And it turned into one of the safest and greatest friendships of my life. Because there was just absolute trust. Everything she said and everything I said was just so completely reliable. And it was beautiful. And, she had to move. Her ambitions laid elsewhere. And I remember when she told me and we were talking about it, and I was kind of down about it, but I was like, we're still going to talk, right? We're still going to call and we'll make time to hang out and stuff. Like, right now you're like one of my closest friends. Like, I can't imagine my life without you. And just in her classic way of communicating, she was like, no, that's just not who I am. I'm really the type of person to really be where I am. And generally, once I move, I don't really keep up with my friends from where I was. It's just not really who I am. And it's no harsh feelings. It's nothing against you. I love you. But I'm just not really the person to keep in touch. And I promise I will always think highly of you and I will always send you good vibes. But I'm not the person to call you every week. And honestly, that was pretty crushing to hear because I am the person to call every week. And that's kind of my MO for my closest friends, is I call them every week and I pretty much never miss it. And that keeping in touch piece is so important for someone like me. But as much as it hurt to hear that from her, it was so much better in the long run, because when she did move and when our communication eventually fell off, there was no hard feelings. I knew it wasn't because I did something wrong, or because she all of a sudden hated me or didn't want to be friends anymore, which are the usual thoughts that would go through my head when someone stopped talking to me. I knew it was because that was just who she was. And she had communicated that to me clearly and openly and honestly. We had started our friendship with realness and authenticity, and we had ended it with realness and authenticity. And I have tried to honor that ever since. In every relationship, personal, professional, platonic, romantic, I have tried to be as real as possible and as open as possible, and to be as honest as possible, which has been tough, but has ultimately been really good for me and for my friendships and relationships. So I want to give you a little acronym to kind of help you. The biggest hack in building friendships, and again, like I said, I think communication is the most important pillar. The biggest hack is just say what's on your mind. And I've had to learn this the hard way. There's so many times where I didn't say what was on my mind, and I never got to say it because the moment passed and the person moved on, and those words that should have been said out loud, I'll take them to my grave and I will regret those things. But every time I have built up the courage to say what I wanted to say, negative or positive, I've never regretted it. I've always looked back with gratitude on the moments that I have been real and that I have said what was on my mind. So the little acronym to help you is say it fast. And fast is an acronym, okay? The F is for feel. Whenever there's something you want to say, feel it. Feel the feeling. Think the thought. Okay? That's F, which is feel. A, which is acknowledge and adjust. There's always going to be resistance to these things that you want to say, right? Otherwise, you would have already said it. So there's going to be resistance, and that resistance is going to be there for some probably somewhat valid reason, right? Maybe it could make the situation awkward. Maybe it might hurt the other person's feelings. So don't ignore the resistance. I mean, the resistance is there for a reason, right? A lot of times the resistance will save your butt, keep you from saying something stupid you shouldn't say. So don't just ignore it. Acknowledge it and adjust your wording. Okay? If what you say is going to hurt the other person's feelings, be diplomatic about it, right? This is about honesty, not brutal honesty. There's a quote my brother said to me once. He said, people who are obsessed with brutal honesty generally tend to be more concerned with the brutality than the honesty. And I think that's true. We can be real with people without like tearing their feelings up. If you think it's going to be awkward, acknowledge that. Maybe change your wording a little bit, right? You don't have to say it exactly as it is in your head. You can adjust it a little bit, but make sure you keep the message real, right? The whole point is to be honest. So that's F and A. S is say it. Most important part, right? Say it. And T is take a beat. In other words, let it sit. Because I find a lot of times when we say these vulnerable, real things with people, our knee-jerk reaction is to try to qualify it. Is to say, well, actually, that didn't quite come out right, or that's actually not what I meant, or blah, 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 blah. Right? We try to lessen the impact of what we just said because we're afraid of how it might land. Don't do that. Just say what you mean and mean what you say. Let it sit and see how they take it. Oftentimes, the outcome will be really, really good. It will move you in the direction that you want to go. If it's a tough conversation, it will help you end the friendship a lot smoother. If it's a good conversation, it will only grow the love and the trust between you. Because when you are real and you are open and you are honest and you are direct, they will in turn be more real and be more honest and be more open and be more direct. You can only go up from there. So I do have to say, even if you are, I just want to be real with you. Even if you do get this whole conflict thing down, and you become a conflict-facing person, and you get this whole vulnerability thing down, and you become a very authentic and real person, and you get this whole communication thing down, and you say what's on your mind, and you mean when you say it. There are no guarantees with people. You never know what people are going through. You never know what they're thinking. You never know what they want or what they need. And so you could do everything right, and sometimes the friendship will still fall apart. There are no guarantees with people because you cannot control people. You can sink so much time and energy and money into trying to control people, but at the end of the day, they will always have their own autonomy, and they will always do what they need to do and what they want to do. So trying to play this game of trying to control other people is the wrong game to play. Instead of trying to control other people, play the game of trying to control yourself. Okay? Because what we can try to optimize for is that people in general are attracted to people who are like them. Right? We find warmth and we find familiarity in people who exhibit the same values that we do. So if you focus on being the type of friend that you want to have in your life, you will naturally attract those types of friends into your life. And you will most likely end up with the friends that you want, right? So if you start being really open and honest and direct in your communication, and you meet someone and you're open and honest and direct with them, and they in turn are an open and honest and direct person, right? They're going to see that from you and be like, oh, like this person gets it. Like we are on the same level. We are vibing right now. They are just like me. They understand the importance of this. And you click. And if you meet someone and you're open and honest and direct with them, and they are not that type of person, maybe they're more dishonest. Maybe they haven't quite gotten a hold of that honesty muscle quite yet. Right? They're going to experience your open, honest, direct communication, and they're going to be so turned off. They're going to be like, like, this is too much. Like, this is not how I communicate. This is not how I think is how we should go about interacting with people in the world. And they will be turned off. And they will exit themselves from your life. They will take care of it for you, right? You don't have to have that hard conversation with them. You could just be real with them, and they will self-select and exit themselves if they feel like they're not a good match for you. And you extrapolate that strategy over a long enough period of time, and you will almost certainly end up, as long as you're interacting with people and you're being real with them, you almost certainly end up with a good group of friends who get you, who understand you, and who love you for who you are. And man, what more could you want from life than that? So, I hope you got some value from those 3 pillars. Again, if you liked this video, please like it, because that tells me that this is the kind of content that you like, and I will in turn work to make more content like this. If you want to see more content like this, of course, please subscribe. That way I can keep pushing stuff out to you that will help you live a better life. And of course, if there's anything that you felt like I forgot, that you feel is really, really important to friendship and I just didn't mention, please put it in the comments, because I am always looking to augment my perspectives, and anyone who sees your comments is also going to benefit from that. And just don't forget that in your quest to build friendships, I am rooting for you.